The dog would not leave the chair. Every evening, when the dishes were done and the television murmured low in the next room, the old brown shepherd named Boone crossed the kitchen, lay down beside the empty wooden chair at the foot of the table, and pressed his greying muzzle against the seat as though something he loved had only just stood up from it. Renee had watched him do this for 4 months, ever since she brought him home from the shelter on the east side of the city, and she still did not understand it. The chair had come with the apartment. It was the kind of plain pine chair people leave behind when they move, scuffed at the legs, one rung loose. Nobody sat in it. Renee ate her late dinners standing at the counter after her shift, and her son Theo did his homework at the other end. Yet Boone went to that chair the way a person goes to a grave, and he waited there, and his tail did not move. She did not know yet that the chair was not a piece of furniture at all. She did not know it was the last thing in the world that still smelled like the man who had loved this animal before her. She only knew that her dog was grieving someone, and that she had paid $11 to adopt a heartbreak she could not name. If you have ever loved an animal who carried a sorrow you could not reach, stay with me, because this one comes all the way around. Boone had been at the shelter for 9 weeks. Nobody wanted a senior dog with a cloudy eye and a habit of staring at the door. Renee had not gone there for a dog at all. She had gone to drop off the old blankets her late mother left behind, because the woman at the front desk had once been kind to her, and because Renee could not bear to throw a good blanket away when something cold might need it. The shepherd had watched her the whole time from the 3rd kennel down. When she crouched to look at him, he did not bark or jump. He only laid his chin on the concrete and looked at her with the patience of something that had already lost everything once and had decided not to hope out loud about it. Renee was 34 years old, and she worked 2 jobs, and she had exactly no room in her life for another mouth to feed. She took him home anyway. That was simply who she was. She'd been raising Theo alone since the boy was 4, after his father drove to Atlanta for a job that did not exist and never came back. She cleaned offices downtown from 6 in the evening until 11, pushing a vacuum down carpeted hallways where the nameplates on the doors carried salaries she would have needed 9 years to earn, emptying wastebaskets full of coffee cups people threw away half full. Then she worked the register at a pharmacy on the weekends, ringing up other people's medicine and other people's birthday cards, and at the end of the month there were 320s left over if nothing went wrong, and something always went wrong. The car needed a belt, and the man at the shop quoted her $200 and then looked at her face and said he could do it for $90 if she did not mind the part being used. Theo needed cleats and grew out of them in a season, the way boys do, his feet outrunning her paychecks. The heat in the apartment ran on a meter that ate quarters like a hungry thing, and on the coldest nights she fed it from a jar on the windowsill and watched the level of quarters drop and did the math on how many were left before the cold came back. She knew the exact price of everything. A gallon of milk was $3.19. A bus transfer was $1.50. A month of staying exactly even, of nothing breaking, of no fevers and no field trips and no car trouble, cost more than she made, and she paid the difference in sleep, in skip meals she told Theo she had eaten at work, in the slow erosion of a body that was 34 and felt 50. She paid it without complaint, because complaining had never once lowered a bill, and because the boy was watching, always, to learn from her how a hard life was supposed to be carried. When the shelter worker told her the dog's adoption fee was $11, a number meant to move an animal nobody wanted, Renee counted it out in singles from the bottom of her purse and did not let herself think about what $11 could have bought instead. She told herself a dog would be good for Theo. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that the animal's quiet had reached into her chest and taken hold of something that had been lonely for a long time. The first night, Boone did not eat. He walked the small apartment once, slowly, nose down, reading a story off the floorboards that Renee could not see, pausing at the threshold of each room as though checking whether someone he expected might be in it. Then he found the pine chair, and he lay down beside it, and he sighed the way a man sighs when he sets down something heavy. Theo, who was 10, sat on the floor next to him and stroked his ears and asked why the dog was sad. And Renee, watching from the counter with a dish towel in her hands, said she did not know. She was telling the truth. What she did not know, what nobody had told her, was that the chair and the dog had arrived in that apartment by separate roads that began at the same place. She did not know that 2 streets over, in a brick row house with a wheelchair ramp going grey in the weather, a man's family was still cleaning out the rooms of someone who had died in February. She did not know that the chair had once stood at the head of a different table. She would learn all of it, though not yet. The weeks went on the way weeks do for people who are tired. Boone settled into the household the way an old dog settles, claiming a square of sun by the window in the afternoon, learning the sound of Theo's key in the lock, walking the boy to the bus stop in the morning, and waiting at the curb until the bus pulled away. He was gentle past all reason. When Theo cried over a bad grade on a math test, the kind of grade that meant summer school the family could not pay for, the dog put his whole heavy head in the boy's lap and stayed there until the crying stopped. When Renee came home past 11, with her feet aching and her hands raw from the cleaning solution that left them cracked at the knuckles all winter, Boone met her at the door and leaned his entire weight against her shins, a long, steady press that said, "You are home now, you can stop." She started talking to him the way you talk to someone who listens. She told him about the supervisor who shorted her hours and then dared her, with his eyes, to say something. She told him about the rent going up $40 in the spring, and the notice taped to the door, and the way her stomach had dropped when she read it. She told him things she did not tell another living soul, not Theo, who was too young to carry it, not the women at the pharmacy, who had troubles of their own. And the dog received all of it with the same grave attention, and asked for nothing, and judged her not at all. There is a particular loneliness in being the only adult holding a household together, the loneliness of having no one to be afraid in front of, and the dog had quietly dissolved it just by being there at 11 at night with his warm weight and his steady eyes. And yet every evening, no matter how the day had gone, he left her side and went to the empty chair. He would press his nose to the seat and breathe there a long time, slow and deep, the way you breathe in a smell you are afraid is fading. Then he would lie down with his spine against the chair leg and keep a watch. That had no end and no reward. It unsettled her. One night she knelt and put her own face down near the seat and breathed in, trying to find whatever he found. She smelled old pine and lemon cleaner and nothing else. Whatever was in that chair was meant for a sense she did not have. She thought about giving the chair away. She did not. Some stubborn tenderness in her would not take from the dog the one thing in the apartment he seemed to need. Across the city, in a glass office tower whose lobby was floored in marble the colour of cream, a man named Marcus Webb was failing to grieve his father correctly, and it was costing him sleep. Marcus was 48 and he ran a company that built senior care facilities, the good kind, the kind with gardens and music therapy and aides who were paid a living wage, and he had built it from nothing on the back of a promise he had made to the man who raised him. His father, Sterling, had been a barber for 41 years on the South Side, a man who cut hair for $3 when people had $3, and for free when they did not, a man who kept a glass jar of butterscotch on the counter for children, a folding chair on the sidewalks for old men who only wanted somewhere to sit and be spoken to. The shop had smelled of talc and warm towels, and the particular blue liquid the combs soaked in. And on Saturday mornings, the line of men waiting their turn would talk politics and baseball, and the troubles of their grown children, and Sterling would listen to all of it with the same patience, whether the man in his chair was a deacon or a drunk. He had never raised his voice and never turned anyone away, and never once, in 41 years, let a child leave his shop without reaching for the jar. Marcus had grown up sweeping that floor, gathering the soft drifts of hair into a dustpan for a nickel a day, learning without being taught that a man's worth was measured by how he treated the people who could do nothing for him. Sterling Webb had never owned much. He had owned a shop, a Bible, a recliner, a barber's chair he refused to update because the old one fit his hands, and a dog. The dog had been the trouble of his last years. After Sterling's stroke, after the wheelchair, after the move into the small managed apartment, 2 streets from a woman named Renee, he would never meet. The old man had clung to that dog like a raft. The stroke had taken the right side of him, and most of his speech had turned the barber's steady hands into things that trembled and dropped what they held, and the only living creature that did not seem to mourn the man he used to be was the shepherd, who climbed onto the bed and laid his head on Sterling's chest and asked him for nothing he could no longer give. Marcus had wanted to put his father in one of his own beautiful facilities. He had a room ready, a good one, south-facing, with a garden view and an aide on every shift. Sterling refused. He told his son, in the broken half words the stroke had left him, that a man who could no longer do anything for himself could at least still choose his own door, his own chair, his own animal at his feet. So Marcus paid for an aide and visited on Sundays and told himself it was enough. But on the February morning his father did not wake. The aide had found the old shepherd lying against the leg of Sterling's kitchen chair, refusing to move, keeping a vigil over a chair whose occupant had finally gone where the dog could not follow. In the grief and the paperwork and the hard machinery of death, the dog had slipped away. The family was scattered. Marcus was drowning in the estate. Somebody, a cousin, a neighbour, no one could later say exactly who, had taken the old animal to a shelter on the east side because nobody could think what else to do with a grieving senior dog in the middle of a funeral. And the chair, the plain pine kitchen chair, where Sterling had sat, of his last 2 years with his coffee and his dog, had gone out with a load of donated furniture to the same managed building's storage, and from there, when Renee moved into the unit that had been quietly turned over and re-rented, it had simply stayed. 2 streets. The dog and the chair had travelled 2 streets apart and landed in the same small kitchen, and the only one in the world who understood that they belonged together was the dog, who could not say so, and who said it the only way he had, every single evening, with his nose against the wood. The distance between Sterling's old row house and Renee's apartment was less than 400 yards, a walk an old man could once have made in 10 minutes, a distance the dog had surely walked at Sterling's side 100 times back when the barber's legs still worked, back before the stroke folded him into the wheelchair and shrank his whole world down to 4 rooms and an animal. The grief of the city is mostly a matter of inches, of the wall between one apartment and the next, of the people we pass on the sidewalk carrying loads we will never know about. Renee carried hers to work every evening. Marcus carried his up 40 floors of glass, and the dog carried the heaviest load of all, which was the knowledge of where a beloved hand belonged, and the long patience of waiting for it to come back, and he carried it alone, in a kitchen 2 streets from the place it began, with no way on earth to make the woman who fed him understand. Have you ever felt the weight of a thing you could not yet name? Renee felt it every night and called it nothing, and went to bed. Spring came hard that year. The pharmacy cut Renee's weekend hours, and the math that had always barely worked stopped working at all. She sat at the table one Sunday with the bills fanned out in front of her, and a calculator, and the particular fear that has no drama in it, the quiet fear of a person doing arithmetic that will not come out right, no matter how many times she runs it. Boone lay against the chair beside her. Theo was asleep. She did the numbers 4 times. Rent light, the car payment she had skipped twice already, the field trip permission slip with the $12 Oz Theo had been too proud to ask for, that she had found crumpled in his backpack. There was not enough. There had not been enough for a long time. But for years, she had patched the gap with overtime. And now there was no overtime to be had. She put her head down on the table and let herself cry for exactly 2 minutes, because that was all she could afford. And then she lifted her head and wiped her face and started looking for what she could sell. There was not much. Her mother's wedding ring, which she had sworn she would never part with. A television. The dog she could not sell and would not have if she could, and the chair. She looked at the plain pine chair with the loose rung and thought, that at least is worth something to a thrift store, a few dollars, and she reached out to test its weight, and Boone lifted his head off the floor and looked at her. He did not growl. He only looked at her with the cloudy eye and the clear one. And he put his paw up onto the seat of the chair, the way a person puts a hand on something to keep it from being taken, and he held it there, and he made a sound low in his chest that was not a bark and was not a whine, but was the closest thing to a word she had ever heard from him. Renee took her hand off the chair. She did not sell it. She sold the television instead, for $60 to a man who came in a hatchback, and it covered the field trip and half the light bill. And she told herself she would find the rest. That week she did something she had been too proud to do for years. She went to the church on the corner, not the big one, the small storefront one with the hand-lettered sign, and she asked the pastor if there was any help for a woman who was working as hard as she could, and still coming up short. She had walked past that storefront 100 times. She had never gone in, because going in meant admitting that the careful machine of her life had finally broken down where someone could see it. The pastor, an older woman named Joy with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, did not make her fill out a form or explain herself twice. She made her a cup of coffee in a chipped mug and set it down and sat across from her and said, "Take your time, I have got nowhere else to be." Renee told her that the whole thing, the 2 jobs and the cut hours, and the meter that ate quarters, and the boy who was too proud to ask for $12, and somewhere in the telling the dam she had been holding for years gave way. And she put her face in her hands at a folding table in a storefront church, and cried the way a person cries when they have been strong for too long. Joy did not rush her. When the worst of it had passed, she told Renee about a fund, a small one, money the members put in a coffee can on the back table for exactly this, for the times when a good person's arithmetic stopped coming out right through no fault of their own. It was not much. It was $120, enough to keep the lights on through the month. Renee said she could not take charity. Joy reached across the table and held her hand, and said the thing Renee would carry for a long time afterward, that being seen was not the same as being pitied, and that a person could accept help without becoming small, and that the people who put their dollars in, that did it because someone had once done it for them, and the only way to honour that was to take it, and one day fill the can yourself. On her way out, drying her eyes in the vestibule, Renee noticed the flyers on the corkboard by the door, and one of them stopped her. It was a notice from a family looking for a dog. A senior shepherd, brown, one cloudy eye, lost from an estate in February. There was a photograph. Renee stood in the vestibule of a storefront church holding the flyer with both hands, and her heart did a slow and terrible turn, because the dog in the photograph was lying against the leg of a plain pine chair, and the chair was the one in her kitchen. She did not call the number right away. She wants me to tell you she is not proud of that, but she did not. She drove home with the flyer on the passenger seat and Boone's name, his real name, which the flyer said was not Boone at all but something else, rattling in her chest like a stone in a can. For 3 days she did not call. She watched the dog she had come to love lie against the chair every evening, and she understood now what he was doing. And the understanding broke something open in her. He was not grieving a stranger. He was keeping faith with a man who had sat in that chair every morning, a man whose hands the dog still expected, every single night, to feel on the top of his head. The chair was the last place the dog's whole world had still been intact. And somewhere across the city a family was looking for him. A family that, the flyer made clear, had the means to look, had printed glossy photographs and posted a reward, $400 for the safe return of an old dog nobody at the time had thought to keep. Renee needed $400 the way a drowning person needs air. She sat at the table the 3rd night with the flyer and the phone and the dog, and she did the kind of arithmetic that has nothing to do with money. She thought about Theo, who walked the dog to the bus and slept better with the animal in the doorway of his room. She thought about herself, the way the dog leaned his weight against her shins at 11 at night and said, "You can stop now." She thought about $400 and what it would mean, the car payment, the cushion, the first time in 2 years she would not be 1 bad week from disaster. And she thought about the dog's paw coming up onto the chair, holding it, that low sound that was almost a word. She could keep him, the family had given up. Possession was 9/10 of everything, and the flyer was 3 months old and no one would ever know. She picked up the phone and she called the number, because being seen was not the same as being pitied, and because a person could lose nearly everything and still refuse to become small. Marcus Webb almost did not answer. He was in his office past 9 on a Tuesday, going through the last boxes of his father's things, which had finally been brought to him from the storage, because he could not make himself go through them anywhere else. He had a barber's apron in his lap, folded, and a glass jar with 3 petrified butterscotches still in the bottom, and he was not crying, which worried the assistant, who kept finding excuses to walk past his open door, because a man who will not cry over a barber's apron is a man holding something at a depth that is dangerous. When his phone rang from a number he did not know, he answered it the way tired people answer late calls, braced for bad news. The woman on the line said she thought she had his father's dog. Marcus set down the apron. He had stopped believing, weeks ago, that the dog would ever surface. The shelters had no record under the right name. The animal had vanished into the city the way the unwanted vanish, and Marcus had added it to the private ledger of things he had failed to protect, a ledger that had his father's whole last year on it, every Sunday he had cut short, every visit he had spent on his phone. And now a stranger was telling him the dog was alive, was loved, was asleep on her kitchen floor as they spoke, and Marcus Webb put his hand over his mouth in a glass office 40 floors above the city and made a sound he had not made at the funeral or since. He asked if he could come. Not to take the dog, he said quickly, hearing his own fear in it. Just to see him. Just to see the old boy one more time. They met on a Saturday morning in Renee's small kitchen, because she would not make a grieving man stand in a parking lot, and because some part of her needed him to see the chair. Marcus came in a coat that cost more than her rent and stood in the doorway looking suddenly like a boy. And Boone, who had not risen quickly for anything in 4 months, got to his feet and crossed the floor and pushed his head into the man's hands as if no time at all had passed, as if the months were nothing, as if he had been waiting by the chair precisely so that he would be ready for this. Marcus went down onto his knees on Renee's kitchen floor in his expensive coat and put his arms around the old dog's neck and wept without any dignity at all, and Renee turned to the sink and ran the water so he could do it without being watched. When he stood up, he saw the chair. He went very still. He crossed to it and put his hand flat on the seat the way the dog did, and he said, in a voice that had gone to gravel, that it was his father's, that his father had sat in it every morning, that he had looked for the chair too, had assumed it lost with everything else. And here it was, here they both were, the chair and the dog, in the kitchen of a woman he had never met, 2 streets from where his father had died. He asked her how. She told him the whole accidental truth, the $11 and the blankets and the moving van and the storage. And Marcus listened to the long, unlikely chain of it, and understood that his father's dog had not been abandoned to the void after all. The animal had walked, by whatever grace runs underneath the accidents of the world, straight into the home of someone who would love him the way Sterling had. And the chair had gone with him, as if the two could not bear to be separated, as if the old man had reached out one last time to keep his dog company. That was the moment the gap closed, not with a document or a courtroom, but with a man's hand and a dog's head, and a plain pine chair in a poor woman. Marcus asked her then what she needed. He asked it plainly, the way his father would have, without any of the careful distance that money usually puts around the question. And Renee, who had spent her whole life refusing to be small, found that she could not lie to him, not after what she had just watched, and she told him the truth, that she could not afford to keep the dog, that she had called him about the reward because she needed it, had needed it so badly, she had nearly not called at all, had nearly kept his father's dog and his father's chair and his father's grief all to herself because $400 was the difference between drowning and air. She told him she was ashamed of how long she had stared at that phone. Marcus Webb looked at this woman who had spent 11 of her last dollars to save a dog nobody wanted, who had sold her television before she would sell the chair the dog loved, who had driven across the city to return an animal she could not afford to lose, and he understood that he was standing in front of the rarest thing his money had ever failed to buy. He did not offer her $400. He sat down at her table, in the chair that was not his father's, and he asked her about her life. She told him. The 2 jobs, the boy, the man who drove to Atlanta, the meter that ate quarters. He listened the way the dog listened, completely. And when she was done, he told her about his father, the barber who cut hair for free, the butterscotch jar, the folding chair on the sidewalk for Olden who only wanted to be spoken to. He told her his company built places for the old to live with dignity, and that he had been looking for 2 years for people to run those places. People who understood that dignity was not a marble lobby, but the thing his father had, the thing she had, the refusal to make a person small. He did not offer her the reward, he offered her a job. A real one with hours that did not eat her alive, and a wage that would let her son ask for, cleats out loud. He told her his father would have wanted the dog to stay exactly where the dog had chosen to be, and that he would have wanted the chair to stay too, because a chair is only wood until someone has loved a life from it, and then it is a kind of church. Renee did not take the job that morning. She was too stunned and too proud, and too afraid of how much she wanted it. She told him she would think about it, and Marcus smiled, because that careful refusal was the most familiar thing about her, and he left his card on the table under the edge of the butterscotch jar he had brought, because he wanted the dog to have it. He came back the next Sunday, and the one after that. He came to see the dog, he said. And that was true, but he also came to sit in the kitchen where his father's chair still stood, and to drink coffee with a woman who reminded him of everything good he was trying to build. And slowly the visits stopped being about the dog at all. Renee took the job in May. The first morning she put on the new shirt she had bought for $9 and stood in front of the mirror longer than she meant to, because the woman looking back at her did not look afraid, and she had forgotten what that face looked like. She was good at the work, better than good, because she had spent her whole life learning the exact weight of every dollar and the exact cost of being unseen, and she ran her facility the way Sterling had run his shop, like a place where no one would ever be made to feel small. She learned the name of every resident and the name of every aide, and she noticed which of the old people had no one who came on Sundays, and she sat with them herself, the way Sterling had sat with the old men on the sidewalk, and she kept a jar of butterscotch on her desk, because Marcus had told her about the one on the counter, and something in her had insisted on it. The raise was not a fortune, it was enough. It was the difference between drowning and air, and then, as the months went on, it became the difference between air and something Renee had not let herself imagine in years, which was rest. The car got its belt, the real part this time new in the box. Theo got his cleats and a winter coat that fit, and a mother who came home before dark and sat at the table while he did his homework and was awake enough to help. The meter still ate its quart, but the jar on the windowsill stayed full now, and on cold nights she did not lie awake doing the math. And every evening, in a kitchen that was a little less afraid than it used to be, the old brown shepherd crossed the floor and lay down beside the plain pine chair and pressed his nose to the seat and breathed. He did it still. He would always do it. It was not grief anymore, not the way it had been. Now Marcus came on Sundays and sat in the chair, his big hand resting on the dog's head exactly where his father's hand had rested. And Boone would close his eyes and sigh that long, heavy sigh, the one that says, "You are home now. You can stop." Except now it was the dog who was finally allowed to stop, the dog who had kept the faith alone in the dark for 4 months until the world caught up to what he already knew. A year later, on a Sunday in February, on the anniversary of the morning Sterling did not wake, Renee set 4 places at the table. She had made the meal Marcus said his father used to make on Sundays, the smothered chicken and the rice, working from the half-memory Marcus could give her, and the small kitchen had filled all afternoon with a smell that made the old dog lift his head and follow her from the stove to the counter and back, hopeful in a way she had not seen in him before. Theo, taller now, his voice beginning to crack, set out the forks the way she had taught him. Marcus, who had become something the word friend was too small for, brought the butterscotch jar from his father's old counter, the real one, refilled now, and set it in the centre of the table where the children who would someday fill this kitchen could reach it. Herself, in a kitchen that no longer frightened her. And the empty chair, which was not empty, because the dog lay against it the way he always had, keeping company with the man who had loved him first. Renee had learned what the chair meant. She had learned it the long way, through $11 and a flyer she almost did not call about, and a grief she carried in her own chest that finally had a name. A chair is only wood until someone loves a life from it. Then it holds them, the way the dog had always known, the way the dog had been trying to tell her, every single evening with his nose against the seat. She reached down and put her hand on Boone's head. In the warm place between his ears, and the old dog leaned into it, and somewhere, 2 streets away, the brick row house with the grey ramp stood quiet, in the winter light, its work finally done. If you have ever loved someone who kept faith with you long after the world stopped watching, tell me about them, because I think the dog would want you to. And if this story stayed with you, there is another one waiting, about a woman who fed a hungry stranger at her diner counter for 6 years and never learned his name, until the morning he came back. The coffee was still warm when Marcus reached down and scratched the old dog's ears, and the chair held them all. And nobody at that table was small anymore.